At New Year dinner, my grandfather slid 3 brown envelopes across the table and whispered, "A New Year token for each of you." The moment stretched, suspended. My mother's fork froze midair. My father's laugh came too quickly, too loud, the kind of performative laughter that fills silence because genuine emotion cannot. "Oh, Dad, not the fake checks again," my mother said, rolling her eyes with theatrical disdain. "You're such a character." My father joined in like mocking him was their family's primary love language, like disrespect had become affection. I didn't laugh. I never do. I simply smiled quietly, placed the envelope carefully into my coat pocket without opening it, and said, "Thank you, Grandpa." They thought it was another one of his old man games, another eccentricity from a man they loved to perform for but secretly resented. But the next morning when my phone rang and the banker said, "Your deposit has cleared, Miss Page." Realizing this was a moment that tore apart everything about family. Then I realized he hadn't been joking at all. My name is Grace Page, and that New Year dinner wasn't the first time I'd watched my family laugh at something that mattered. My parents, David and Pamela, built their entire lives around the appearance of success. They hosted elaborate dinner parties in their renovated brownstone in Brooklyn, posted carefully curated photographs on Instagram in front of their luxury vehicles, and spoke frequently about how they'd worked so incredibly hard for everything we have. What they never mentioned was that most of their foundation had been built on financial support from my grandfather, William Page, the man they loved to perform for in public but secretly resented behind closed doors. Grandpa wasn't just wealthy. He was self-made. He'd started with nothing, built a real estate empire through decades of careful work, and accumulated wealth the old-fashioned way, through discipline, integrity, and quiet persistence. He still drove the same Volvo sedan from 1998. He wore a Timex watch he'd owned since his 40s. He believed in effort over entitlement, in character over appearance, in the quiet power of integrity. I think that's partly why he tolerated me more than he tolerated my parents. I didn't constantly ask for things. I worked. I'd rented a small studio apartment in Astoria and built a career as a freelance video editor, working with independent filmmakers and small production companies. No investors, no partners, just me and my skills and my willingness to work late hours for projects I believed in. My parents thought that was failure. They called it ambitious but misguided in public, which really meant beneath them, beneath their standards, a waste of my potential. But at home they said things like, "You could be making real money if you just use your connections properly," which translated to use Grandpa's name, leverage his relationships, stop actually working and start performing instead. When Grandpa invited us for New Year dinner that year at his Manhattan apartment overlooking Central Park, I went because I genuinely missed him, because his presence was oxygen in an otherwise suffocating family environment. My parents went because they could smell financial possibility, could sense inheritance hovering somewhere in the future, could calculate the value of a New Year dinner investment. I saw it in the way my mother checked her reflection multiple times during the drive, touching up her lipstick. I saw it in the way my father rehearsed his laugh before we even entered the building, practicing the exact tone and duration. Everything with them was strategy, performance, careful calculation. The dining room smelled like pine and roasted lamb. The table was set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the candlelight and threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. Grandpa sat at the head, his posture perfectly straight despite his 83 years, his eyes sharper and more attentive than they appeared. We exchanged the obligatory small talk about work and weather, about my mother's charity committee position and my father's consulting firm, about nothing that actually mattered. The conversation was a dance we'd all learned by heart, steps we followed without thinking, words we said without meaning. Then, as dessert plates were being cleared away, Grandpa reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew 3 identical white envelopes. He placed them on the table with a kind of ceremony, each one positioned with care. "A little something for each of you," he said quietly. His voice carried a weight that belied the casual nature of his words. My mother let out a sharp, performative laugh, the kind designed to show she was in on some joke. "Oh, Dad, not the fake checks again. That's so charming. You always do this." My father chuckled loudly, too loudly, the laugh of a man performing confidence he didn't actually feel. You're priceless, William. Always keeping us entertained with your little tricks. I felt something inside me cringe. Wanted to disappear. Wanted the earth to open and swallow me whole. Grandpa didn't move. He didn't react with visible anger or disappointment. He simply looked at them slowly, methodically, his gaze moving from my mother's face to my father's face, registering something I couldn't quite identify. Then his eyes shifted to me, and I felt my face warm under the intensity of his attention. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes dimmed, a light switching off, a door closing quietly. I didn't open the envelope immediately. I didn't need to understand what it contained to know that this moment held significance beyond my initial comprehension. I simply set down my dessert fork carefully, caught his eye briefly, and said, "Thank you, Grandpa. I really appreciate it." Then I placed the envelope gently into my coat pocket, which hung on the back of my chair. No one noticed that his smile faded slightly after that gesture. They continued their performance, bragging about their recent vacation to Cabo, laughing about some social event, discussing their investment portfolio. But I saw the way his hand lingered near his wine glass. I saw the way he blinked slower than usual, the way his jaw tightened imperceptibly. He'd expected this reaction from them. He'd prepared himself for their mockery. And somehow, that made the moment sadder, the knowledge that he'd already reconciled himself to their behavior. Later that night, when we said our goodbyes in the apartment's entrance hall beneath the crystal chandelier, he hugged me longer than he should have. His embrace was tighter, more desperate, more intentional. He whispered close to my ear, "Keep it safe, Grace. And keep yourself safe too." I nodded, thinking I understood what he meant, but realizing only much later that I'd fundamentally misunderstood the weight of those words and the intention behind them. The drive back to Astoria was silent except for the rhythmic sound of windshield wipers against the glass. The rain had turned to sleet, and the Brooklyn streets were slick and treacherous. My mother broke the silence first, twisting in the passenger seat to look back at me. "You actually kept that thing," she said, her tone dripping with disbelief and condescension. "You know he does this every year. It's just his little performance, his way of feeling important." My father chuckled from the driver's seat, already checking his phone for messages and emails. "It's all theater, really. He needs to feel like he's still relevant, like he's still the patriarch. Classic narcissism, honestly." I stared out the window at the falling sleet streaking down the glass, watching the city lights blur. "Or maybe," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, "he just wants to see who still respects him." My mother sighed in that dramatic, exasperated way she does when she thinks I'm being naive or unsophisticated. "Sweetheart, you really need to stop taking everything so seriously. It's just an old man's joke. Nothing more than that." That night, back in my small Astoria apartment with its exposed brick walls and single window overlooking the street, everything felt colder than usual. The radiator clanked and hissed weakly in the corner, and the lingering scent of roasted lamb still clung to my coat despite the cool night air. I hung the coat on the back of a wooden chair and pulled the envelope from the pocket, turning it over slowly in my hands. Grandpa's handwriting was there, steady, firm, familiar from hundreds of notes and cards received over decades. I didn't open it immediately, even though curiosity pulled at me. Something in the evening had felt sacred, had felt like it deserved more respect than opening it casually at home. So that night, sitting on my bed with the city sounds drifting through my window, I tore the envelope flap open carefully and slid out a real check. Not a theatrical prop. Not a joke. A legitimate check with proper banking information, my name printed clearly, and an amount that made my breath catch, 6 figures. The ink wasn't faded or smudged. The signature was his, clean, deliberate, powerful. My hands trembled as I stared at the numbers. For a moment, I simply sat there in stunned silence, my brain struggling to process the reality of what I was holding. Then I slipped the check carefully back inside the envelope, folded the flap with precision, and placed it in the small wooden box on my bedside table where I keep things that matter, old letters, photographs, mementos of genuine connection. The next day, I woke to my phone buzzing with a message from my friend Marcus, who worked with me occasionally on video editing projects. "How was the fancy family New Year dinner?" he typed. I replied simply, "My parents laughed at my grandfather." I didn't. Marcus sent back a voice memo, his tone half joking, half serious. "Some families are just broken, you know. At least you can see it clearly. That's something." I smiled and went back to editing footage for a documentary project. But something nagged at me persistently. Grandpa's last words replayed in my mind on loop like a song I couldn't escape. "Keep it safe, Grace. Keep yourself safe too." What had he meant, exactly? Was it symbolic? Was there something deeper I'd missed in my initial understanding? I decided in that moment to deposit the check, not out of greed or a desire to prove a point, but out of genuine curiosity about what would happen next. Maybe he'd wanted me to understand something. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was simply his way of showing me what he believed I deserved: acknowledgement, respect, genuine care. Hours later, while I was editing footage for a client's video project, my phone rang. Unknown number. My heart jumped slightly. Freelancers always hope for new project opportunities. "Hello," I answered, my professional voice automatically engaging. A calm, polite voice on the other end. "Good afternoon, Miss Page. I'm calling from Chase Bank. Your recent deposit has cleared successfully. The check for $475,000 has been processed, and the funds are now available in your account." I froze completely. The entire world seemed to stop moving. $475,000. Real. Cleared. I checked my banking app with shaking fingers, and there it was, the exact amount, now showing in my account balance. My heartbeat stumbled and skipped erratically. If mine cleared, what about theirs? I didn't even have time to process the full implications before my phone buzzed again. My mother's name illuminated the screen with urgent insistence. I hesitated for only a moment before accepting the video call. Her face appeared on screen, and I could immediately see the anger simmering beneath her carefully maintained composure. She was using that particular tone of voice, sharp and shaky, the way she sounds when she's furious but trying to maintain the pretense of calm control. "Grace, did you talk to your grandfather today?" she demanded, her eyes darting back and forth agitatedly. "No, I haven't spoken to him since New Year dinner," I said slowly, already understanding that something significant had happened. "Well, something's wrong with the checks," she said, her voice rising slightly with panic. "The bank called us this morning. They said the checks he gave us were flagged as suspicious. They said he called them and put some kind of hold on them. They won't clear. They said," then she paused, lowering her voice as if I'd done something terrible and she was ashamed. "They said yours went through." I stayed quiet. The silence on my end seemed to make her angrier, seemed to confirm something she already suspected. "Did you call him?" she demanded. "Did you tell him something? Did you warn him somehow?" "No, Mom. I just deposited it like he intended." "That's what you do with gifts," I replied calmly, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. "Well, he's obviously playing favorites again," she snapped, her voice tight with resentment and fear. "He's punishing us for being successful, for building our own lives. This is cruel and manipulative." I wanted to say no, he's punishing you for laughing at him. He's showing you that respect matters more than money. But I didn't say it. I simply listened to her breathe into the phone, frantic and defensive, trying to rewrite the story before anyone else could narrate it differently. I listened and said nothing. Later that same day, my father called. His tone was colder, more measured, the voice of a man trying to regain control of a situation spiraling beyond his understanding. "Your mother's quite upset," he said without preamble. "You could have told us you were depositing the check. Given us some warning." "It was a gift," I said simply. "That's what you do with gifts." "Don't be smart with me, Grace," he said sharply. "Your grandfather is elderly. He's not thinking clearly anymore. These theatrics aren't healthy for anyone." That word elderly hung in the air like an accusation, as if age somehow invalidated his clarity, his judgment, his right to make his own decisions about his own money and his own family. That evening, Grandpa called me directly. His voice was calm and steady, nothing like the frantic energy of my parents' calls. There was peace in his tone, the kind that comes from having already made difficult decisions and accepted the consequences. "Did the bank contact you, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Yes, Grandpa, they did," I said. "They said my deposit cleared." "Good," he said simply. A pause followed, heavy with meaning. I could hear the crackle of his fireplace on the other end of the line, the sound of warmth and safety. "Don't worry about your parents, Grace. Some lessons take longer to learn than others. They will be all right, okay," he said. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. The message was already clear, written in the action of stopped checks and the reality of consequences. The next morning, the family group chat exploded with activity. My mother's long, rambling messages filled with blame and confusion and veiled accusations. My father threatening to straighten this whole situation out with Grandpa directly. But Grandpa said nothing, contributed nothing to the chaos of recriminations and excuses. Instead, an invitation arrived in the post 2 days later, handwritten on expensive cardstock. His handwriting again, elegant and precise. It simply read dinner. Same place. January 8th, 7 p.m. No explanation. No apology. Just a time and a place and an expectation that we would understand the gravity of what was being requested. Sophie, my friend from work, called when she heard. "Do you think he's going to absolutely tear them apart? Call them out completely?" I looked at the cardstock, at the neat black ink forming each letter with such care. "I think he already has," I said quietly. "The invitation is just the formality." The real confrontation happened the moment the checks were refused. January 8th arrived cold and clear, the kind of New York winter day where the sky seems to press down on the city with the weight of accumulated sadness. I stood in front of Grandpa's building again, snow crunching under my boots, different snow from New Year, falling fresh and clean. My heart was steady though, calm in a way it hadn't been in years. This time, I wasn't the quiet one waiting for permission to belong. This time, I was the only one who'd passed the test. Grandpa's apartment looked exactly the same as it had days earlier. Warm light spilling from the tall windows, wreaths on the doorframe, the faint hum of a fireplace audible from the hallway. But the air felt different when I stepped inside, tighter, charged with tension and anticipation, and the weight of unspoken truths about to be articulated. The dining room was set identically to New Year dinner. 3 place settings this time instead of 4. The same fine china. The same crystal glasses. The same formal table that had witnessed decades of family dinners, celebrations, disappointments, and now, apparently, reckonings. When I stepped into the room, I saw that my parents were already seated. My mother sat stiffly, arms crossed defensively, a smile glued to her face like cracked porcelain. My father scrolled through his phone mechanically, but kept glancing toward the hallway, waiting for Grandpa to appear, waiting to understand how this would unfold. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps made both of them look up. Grandpa entered calm and purposeful, carrying a thin stack of papers. He didn't greet us. He didn't offer pleasantries. He simply walked to the head of the table and placed the papers down with quiet ceremony. "I won't keep you long," he said, his voice steady and clear. "You'll each find your names on these documents. Bank statements from this morning." My mother blinked rapidly. "Dad, this isn't funny. You humiliated us. The teller said you stopped our checks." "I did," he confirmed simply. "No apology. No justification. Just fact." "Why?" my father demanded, his voice rising with desperation. If this was some kind of test, it was cruel. Grandpa looked at me for just a moment, then turned his full attention back to my parents. "Cruel would be allowing you to continue believing that respect is optional. Cruel would be letting you think that mockery is affection." My mother's voice wavered, cracked slightly. "We didn't mean anything by it. We were just joking. When you laughed at a gift I offered," he said, his voice firm but not angry. You laughed at me. You laughed at the decades of work that created that gift. She tried to speak again, but he continued. You thought that mockery was harmless. You thought that disrespecting an elderly man in his own home was entertaining. The room went silent. The only sound was the fireplace popping in the corner, the crackle of flames consuming wood, time passing, choices made and consequences accepted. My father pushed back in his chair, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. This isn't fair. You know that Margaret and I have supported you in countless ways. You're overreacting to a simple joke. Grandpa's eyebrows rose slightly. Supported me. You've taken my money and called it independence. You've built an image instead of a life. My mother burst into tears, not quiet tears of genuine remorse, but the dramatic sobs of someone watching their world collapse. The kind of cry that isn't sadness but fear. You can't just cut us off like this, she said between sobs. We're your children. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, and his voice took on a quality I'd never heard before, not angry, but infinitely sad. I already have, he said simply. My father's face flushed red. You'll regret this. No, son, Grandpa said softly. What I regret is raising a man who values appearance over honesty. He turned toward me. Grace, he said, and the way he said my name with such care and respect made my eyes burn. Yes, Grandpa, I managed to say. He pushed a folder toward me. This is yours. I've transferred full control of the trust and properties to your name. My solicitor will guide you through the paperwork. My mother's head snapped up in shock. What? He didn't even look at her. You both still have your homes. You still have your jobs. What you've lost is my belief that you understood what family means. My father stood abruptly, gripping the back of his chair. You're rewarding her for doing nothing. Grandpa's voice finally rose, sharp and cutting. She did everything. She listened. She respected. She didn't laugh. The echo of those words filled the room, reverberated off the walls, settled into the silence that followed. Then quietly, with the weight of finality, now I know who's real. My parents left without eating. The front door slammed. Grandpa and I sat together, eating soup, not talking much, understanding each other in the way that only comes from genuine connection. Before I left that evening, he handed me another envelope. Inside was a single note in his handwriting. Money changes hands every day. Respect only comes once. I drove home in the fading light, his words echoing in my mind. Something inside me had settled, solid and calm, like respect finally finding its rightful place. They thought the check was fake. But the only thing fake that night was their love. I didn't win anything. I simply stopped losing myself trying to earn their approval. If you've ever learned what respect really costs, share your story. Subscribe for more stories of people discovering their worth.